"Mom, are we going to sleep in the car again tonight?" 8-year-old Noah asked the question so quietly it almost disappeared beneath the sound of freezing rain tapping against the windshield. Emily Carter tightened her grip on the steering wheel, even though the old Honda Civic had been parked for hours in the far corner of a Walmart parking lot outside Columbus, Ohio. She looked into the rearview mirror and forced herself to smile at her 3 children squeezed together under 2 thin blankets. "Just for tonight," she whispered, even though they had already spent 6 nights in that car. The engine was off to save gas, and the cold crept through every crack in the vehicle like icy water. Her youngest daughter Sophie slept against her shoulder wearing a pink winter coat that was 2 sizes too small, while Lily sat near the window pretending not to notice her stomach growling. Emily had skipped dinner again so the kids could split the last chicken sandwich she bought with change from the cup holder. Her own hunger didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except getting through one more night without her children realizing how scared she truly was. A security light flickered overhead, casting pale yellow shadows across the parking lot. Around them, shoppers loaded groceries into warm SUVs before driving home to heated houses and soft beds. Emily tried not to look. She used to have those things too. A small apartment, a steady routine, school lunches packed every morning. But life could collapse faster than anyone imagined. One unpaid bill became 5. One missed paycheck became an eviction notice taped to her door. One bad month became a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Sophie suddenly coughed in her sleep, and Emily immediately wrapped both arms around the little girl to keep her warm. "Mom," Lily whispered carefully from the back seat. "I'm not cold if Sophie needs the blanket more." Emily felt something crack inside her chest. Lily was only 10 years old, but poverty had already taught her how to sacrifice. Emily looked away before her daughter could see tears gathering in her eyes. She reached into her purse and pulled out the last granola bar she had saved. For the morning, quietly, she broke it into 3 pieces and handed them to the children. Noah frowned. "Aren't you eating?" Emily smiled again, the kind of smile exhausted mothers learn to fake. "I already ate earlier." It was a lie, but the children accepted it because they wanted to believe their mother could still fix everything. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Emily checked her phone battery. 2% left. No missed calls. No job offers. No miracle coming to save them. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for just a second, trying not to think about what would happen if someone reported them sleeping there again. Then suddenly, bright headlights swept across the inside of the Honda. Emily's eyes snapped open. A long black Rolls-Royce slowly pulled into the empty parking space beside them, its polished exterior glowing under the rain. The engine purred softly before shutting off. Emily's heart began pounding instantly. Rich people didn't come to parking lots like this after midnight. Not unless something was wrong. The back passenger door never opened, but a tall man wearing a dark overcoat stepped out from the driver's side, carrying a large umbrella. He walked toward Emily's car with calm, measured steps until he finally stopped beside her window. Then he gently knocked on the glass. Emily lowered the window barely an inch, cold air rushing inside immediately. The man glanced toward the sleeping children before speaking in a low voice. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "my employer wants to know why your children have been sleeping in this parking lot for the past 3 nights. Emily immediately rolled the window back up halfway, shielding her children from the freezing rain outside. Her pulse raced as she stared at the stranger standing beside the car. The man looked professional, maybe mid-40s, with silver streaks in his dark hair and gloves too expensive for a parking lot like this. Behind him, the black Rolls-Royce waited silently under the stormy sky. Emily swallowed hard before answering. "We are fine," she said quickly. "We will leave soon." The driver studied her face for a moment, as if he had heard that sentence 100 times before. "Ma'am," he replied gently, "with all respect, your daughter is shivering." Emily glanced down at Sophie sleeping against her chest. The little girl's cheeks were pale, and every few seconds her small body trembled from the cold. Emily tightened the blanket around her immediately. "I said we are okay." Her voice sounded firmer this time, but inside she was terrified. Terrified of strangers. Terrified of pity. Terrified someone might call Child Protective Services if they realized the children had nowhere to go. The driver nodded slowly. "My name is Marcus Reed," he said. "My employer noticed your car here earlier this week." Emily frowned. He has been watching us. Marcus shook his head calmly. Not watching. Concerned. Emily almost laughed at the word. Concerned. Nobody had been concerned when the landlord changed the locks on her apartment 2 weeks earlier. Nobody cared when she spent 10 straight hours applying for jobs online from the public library while trying to keep her children quiet. Nobody cared when she sold her wedding ring for gas money and groceries. But now suddenly a man in a luxury car claimed to care because he saw them sleeping in a freezing parking lot. Emily looked away. People like your employer do not stop for families like mine. Marcus hesitated before speaking again. You would be surprised what people remember from their own past. Emily noticed movement inside the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, but the tinted windows kept the passenger hidden. She could barely make out the silhouette of a man sitting quietly in the darkness. Noah slowly lifted his head from the back seat. Mom, he whispered weakly. I do not feel good. Emily turned immediately. Her son's face looked flushed. Then Sophie suddenly began coughing harder against her shoulder, her tiny body trembling again. Panic rushed through Emily instantly. She pressed her hand gently against Sophie's forehead and felt heat. Too much heat. The little girl was burning up. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew that fever. Sophie had been fighting a cold for days, but now it felt worse. Much worse. Emily searched her purse desperately for the bottle of children's medicine she thought she still had. Empty. Her breathing quickened. The nearest urgent care had already closed hours ago, and she only had $11 left until payday from her diner shift on Friday. Marcus noticed the panic spreading across her face. Is she sick? He asked quietly. Emily did not answer at first. She was too busy trying to calm Sophie while keeping her own fear hidden from the older children. Then Sophie opened her tired eyes slightly and whispered something so soft it nearly broke Emily apart. Mommy, I am cold. Emily finally lowered her head in defeat. Just for 1 second. Just long enough for Marcus to see the truth she had spent days trying to hide. They were exhausted. Hungry. Out of options. Marcus glanced back toward the Rolls-Royce, waiting silently for instructions. A moment later, the rear passenger window lowered halfway for the first time. A deep male voice came from inside the darkness. Calm. Controlled. Powerful. Bring them somewhere warm. Emily stared toward the dark window of the Rolls-Royce, her fingers tightening around Sophie instinctively. The voice from inside the car had sounded calm, almost emotionless, but there was something about it that made the entire parking lot suddenly feel still. Marcus gave a respectful nod toward the passenger seat before turning back to Emily. There is a hotel about 10 minutes from here, he explained carefully. My employer has already arranged a room for you and your children. Emily blinked in disbelief. No, the answer came out immediately. Too quickly. Marcus did not react. Ma'am, your daughter needs warmth. I said no. Emily pulled Sophie closer against her chest. Every instinct inside her screamed to protect her children. People did not spend money on strangers without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson the hard way long before she ever ended up sleeping in a car. Marcus remained calm despite the tension in her voice. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his umbrella while cold wind swept across the empty parking lot. You do not owe us anything, he said quietly. Emily almost laughed again. Nobody said words like that unless they wanted something. Across the back seat, Lily leaned forward carefully. Mom, she whispered, trying not to cough. Sophie feels really hot. Emily touched her youngest daughter's forehead again and felt the fever burning stronger now. Her stomach twisted with panic. Sophie shifted weakly in her arms, but did not fully wake up. Emily looked toward the dashboard clock. Nearly 1 in the morning. Every shelter she had called earlier that day was already full. The cheapest motel nearby wanted more money than she had left. Her old Honda barely had enough gas to keep the heater running another hour. For the first time all night, Emily allowed herself to glance directly toward the man sitting inside the Rolls-Royce. The interior lights stayed dim, hiding most of his face, but she could see enough to notice details. Expensive watch. Dark wool coat. One hand resting calmly against the leather seat. He looked like someone completely untouched by hardship, yet he had stopped for them instead of driving away like everyone else. Then suddenly Noah spoke from the back seat. Mom, I think Sophie is crying. Emily looked down quickly. Silent tears rolled across the little girl's flushed cheeks, even though her eyes remained closed. Something inside Emily finally broke. Not pride. Not fear. Exhaustion. 6 nights of trying to stay strong collapsed all at once beneath the sound of her daughter quietly crying in her sleep. Emily lowered her eyes and nodded once. "Just tonight," she whispered. Marcus opened the umbrella wider immediately. "I will help you with the children." Emily still hesitated before unlocking the car doors. She watched Marcus carefully as he helped Noah out first, making sure the boy stayed under the umbrella away from the freezing rain. There was no impatience in his movements. No judgment either, just quiet professionalism. Lily stepped out next, hugging her thin jacket tightly around herself. Her eyes widened the moment she saw the luxury car beside them up close. "Whoa," Noah whispered softly. Emily carried Sophie herself, refusing to let anyone else hold her daughter. As they approached the Rolls-Royce, the rear passenger door slowly opened from the inside. The man finally stepped partially into view. Tall, broad shoulders, early 40s maybe. His expression serious but strangely gentle at the same time. His eyes settled briefly on Sophie before looking back at Emily. "Your daughter needs a doctor by morning," he said quietly. Emily nodded cautiously. "I know." The man studied her for another moment, noticing the exhaustion beneath her brave expression. Then his gaze moved toward the nearly empty Honda sitting alone beneath the parking lot lights. "How long since you slept in a real bed?" he asked. Emily opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out, because the truth was suddenly too humiliating to say aloud. Emily could not remember the last time silence had felt safe. Usually silence meant overdue bills, ignored phone calls, or children sleeping hungry because there was nothing left to say. But inside the Rolls-Royce, silence felt different. Warm, soft, almost unreal. Sophie rested against Emily's chest beneath the thick wool blanket Marcus had handed her during the drive across town. Noah had fallen asleep within minutes, curled beside Lily in the opposite seat, both children exhausted after another night of fear and cold. Emily stayed awake the entire ride. Her body was inside the luxury car, but her mind remained parked back in that freezing Walmart lot beside her broken life. The man sitting across from her barely spoke during the drive. He spent most of the time looking out the rain-covered window while city lights blurred across the glass. Emily noticed how calm he seemed. No need to impress anyone. No unnecessary conversation. People with real power rarely needed attention. After several minutes, the car finally slowed beneath the covered entrance of a downtown hotel Emily had only seen from the outside before. Tall marble columns rose beside glowing glass doors while valets hurried through the rain, carrying umbrellas. Emily immediately stiffened. "No," she whispered under her breath. This place looked too expensive, too clean, too far removed from someone like her. Marcus stepped out first and opened the door carefully. Warm air drifted from the hotel lobby, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and polished wood. Emily hesitated before lifting Sophie gently into her arms. Her shoes were soaked. Her sweatshirt smelled faintly like gasoline from sleeping in the Honda every night. She suddenly became painfully aware of every detail about herself. But before she could apologize or explain, the man beside her spoke quietly. "Nobody here will embarrass you." Emily looked at him for the first time under proper lighting. He was older than she originally thought. Early 40s perhaps. Sharp features. Tired eyes. The kind of face people trusted immediately without understanding why. He extended his hand calmly. "Jonathan Hayes." Emily froze the moment she heard the name. Even after weeks of chaos, she still recognized it instantly. Jonathan Hayes was everywhere. Business magazines. News interviews playing silently on televisions at the diner where she worked double shifts. Billionaire CEO. Real estate empire. One of the richest men in Ohio. Emily stared at him in disbelief. "You are Jonathan Hayes?" she asked softly. Jonathan gave a small nod, almost uncomfortable with the recognition. "Tonight, I am just someone trying to help your daughter." Emily did not know how to respond to that. A valet approached quickly, but Jonathan raised one hand slightly, stopping the young man from speaking. No scene, no attention, just quiet understanding. Emily carried Sophie through the hotel entrance while Lily and Noah followed closely beside Marcus. The children looked around in amazement at the glowing chandeliers and enormous fireplace near the lobby seating area. Noah stared at the ceiling like he had entered another world entirely. Emily suddenly felt tears rising again, but this time from exhaustion instead of fear. A woman at the front desk smiled warmly the moment they approached. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes." Jonathan simply nodded once before handing her a black credit card. Please send hot tea, soup, and children's medicine to the suite immediately. Sweet. Emily nearly stopped walking. Jonathan, she said nervously, one regular room is enough. We cannot accept something expensive. Jonathan looked toward the children standing beside her. Lily was secretly staring at a bowl of fresh fruit on the lobby counter while Noah struggled to stay awake on his feet. Sophie coughed weakly against Emily's shoulder again. Jonathan's expression softened slightly. Emily, he said quietly, no child should have to recover from a fever in the back seat of a car. Emily stood frozen in the middle of the hotel suite while her children explored the room like they had stepped into another universe. Noah pressed a button that slowly opened the curtains, revealing glowing city lights beneath the rainy Ohio skyline. Lily carefully touched the soft white comforter on one of the beds, as if she was afraid someone might tell them they did not belong there. Sophie remained asleep against Emily's shoulder, finally breathing easier in the warmth. The suite itself was larger than Emily's old apartment. A fireplace flickered quietly across from a leather sofa, and fresh towels sat folded neatly inside a marble bathroom bigger than her entire bedroom back home. Emily could not stop staring at everything, not because she wanted luxury, but because she had forgotten what safety looked like. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Emily immediately tensed again until Marcus entered carrying medicine, hot soup, and several shopping bags from a nearby pharmacy. Children's fever reducer, he explained calmly, setting everything on the dining table. And a few essentials. Emily looked inside the bags and saw toothbrushes, clean socks, pajamas, and winter gloves in different sizes for the children. Her throat tightened instantly. Nobody had thought about details like that for her family in a very long time. You did not have to do this, she whispered. Marcus offered a small smile. Actually, I did. Before Emily could answer, another figure appeared quietly in the doorway behind him. Jonathan Hayes stepped into the suite without the expensive coat he had worn earlier, his sleeves rolled slightly, as if he had just left a long meeting instead of rescuing strangers from a parking lot. Emily still struggled to understand why a man like him cared at all. Jonathan glanced toward the children first. How is her fever? Emily gave Sophie the medicine moments earlier, and the little girl was finally sleeping peacefully against the pillows. It is coming down, Emily answered softly. Jonathan nodded once, relief briefly crossing his face before disappearing again behind his usual calm expression. Marcus quietly excused himself, leaving the two of them alone for the first time that night. Emily stood awkwardly near the kitchen counter, unsure what someone in her position was supposed to say to a billionaire who had just changed her children's lives in a single evening. Jonathan noticed immediately. You can stop looking for hidden cameras, he said quietly. Emily blinked. What? A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. You have been waiting for someone to tell you this was a joke ever since we arrived. Emily looked down, embarrassed because he was right. Jonathan walked slowly toward the fireplace before speaking again. When I was 9 years old, my mother and I spent 4 months living in her car outside Cleveland. Emily looked up sharply. That was the first real emotion she had heard in his voice all night. Jonathan kept his eyes on the fire. She worked 2 jobs, slept maybe 3 hours a night, pretended everything was temporary even when she was terrified. Emily stared at him in disbelief. I never heard that story in the news. Jonathan gave a quiet shrug. People prefer success stories after the ending is already clean. The room fell silent for a moment except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Emily slowly sat down beside the bed where Sophie slept. My husband left 8 months ago, she admitted quietly. At first I thought I could hold everything together. Then rent went up. My hours got cut at the diner. Every month felt heavier than the last one. Jonathan listened without interrupting. No judgment. No pity. Just attention. Emily swallowed hard before continuing. I kept telling the kids we were camping because I could not make myself say the word homeless out loud. Jonathan's expression changed slightly at those words. Something deeper. Personal. Then he looked toward Lily, helping Noah open packets of crackers near the table. Your children still trust you, he said softly. Emily frowned. I failed them. Jonathan shook his head immediately. No, Emily. His voice was calm, but certain now. You kept them fed, together, and safe for 6 nights in freezing weather while carrying all of this alone. That is not failure. Emily did not sleep much that night, even though the hotel bed felt softer than anything she had touched in months. Around 3 in the morning, she woke up automatically when Sophie stirred beside her. For one terrifying second, Emily forgot where they were and expected to see fogged car windows and freezing darkness around them. Instead, she saw a warm lamp light, thick blankets, and her daughter sleeping peacefully without shivering. Emily quietly touched Sophie's forehead again. The fever had finally gone down. Relief washed through her so suddenly that tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She sat there in silence, watching all 3 of her children sleeping safely for the first time in days. Noah had fallen asleep, clutching a hotel pillow against his chest, while Lily still wore the new wool socks Marcus brought earlier. Emily realized then how exhausted her children truly were. Kids only slept that deeply when they finally felt safe. The thought nearly broke her heart. Early the next morning, sunlight filtered through the massive windows overlooking downtown Columbus. Emily woke to the smell of pancakes and bacon drifting through the suite. She quickly sat up in confusion before hearing laughter from the next room. Real laughter. She hurried out of the bedroom and froze at the sight waiting for her. Noah sat at the dining table eating scrambled eggs while Sophie giggled over a cup of orange juice almost bigger than her hands. Lily stood near the window smiling shyly at Marcus, who was somehow teaching her how to use the espresso machine like it was the most normal thing in the world. And standing near the kitchen counter in a dark gray sweater was Jonathan Hayes himself, calmly pouring syrup onto a plate of pancakes. Emily stared in disbelief. "You stayed?" she asked before thinking. Jonathan glanced up briefly. "I had breakfast delivered an hour ago. Your children were awake before sunrise." Noah grinned immediately. "Mr. Jonathan, ordered chocolate chip pancakes." Jonathan gave a small shrug. "Your son negotiated aggressively." For the first time in weeks, Emily heard her children laughing without fear underneath it. The sound filled the suite like warmth itself. Emily suddenly felt embarrassed again, looking at her wrinkled clothes and messy hair while standing inside a billionaire's luxury suite. "I should probably leave after breakfast," she said quietly. The room became still for half a second. Jonathan set the syrup bottle down carefully before answering. "Where exactly would you go?" Emily looked away immediately because she did not have an answer. Back to the car. Back to parking lots. Back to pretending everything was temporary. Jonathan walked closer, but kept enough distance not to overwhelm her. "Emily, I spoke with the hotel manager this morning. The suite is available as long as your children need somewhere safe." Emily shook her head instantly. "I cannot accept charity forever. This is not forever." His voice stayed calm. "This is breathing room." Emily opened her mouth to argue again when Lily suddenly spoke from across the room. "Mom," she whispered softly, "can we stay one more night?" Emily looked at her daughter and felt her resistance weaken again. Lily never asked for anything anymore. Not since life fell apart. Before Emily could answer, her phone suddenly buzzed on the kitchen counter. One missed call, then another. An unfamiliar number appeared across the screen. Emily frowned before answering cautiously. "Hello." For several seconds, she said nothing. The color slowly drained from her face, while Jonathan watched quietly from across the room. Emily gripped the phone tighter. "How did you even find me?" she whispered. The children stopped eating immediately. Emily's breathing became uneven as she listened to the voice on the other end. Then finally, she closed her eyes in dread. "No," she said softly. "You cannot just come back whenever you want, Daniel." The moment Emily said Daniel's name, the warmth inside the suite seemed to disappear. Jonathan noticed it immediately. The color had drained from her face so quickly that even Noah stopped eating. Emily turned, slightly away from the children, lowering her voice as she gripped the phone tighter against her ear. "You disappeared for months," she whispered. "You do not get to demand anything from me now." Daniel's voice was loud enough through the speaker for Jonathan to hear pieces of it from across the room. Angry, defensive, excuses mixed with blame. Emily closed her eyes briefly, trying to stay calm for the children. "No," she said again, firmer this time. "They are not speaking to you right now." Lily lowered her eyes toward the table immediately. Noah quietly pushed his plate away. Even Sophie seemed to sense the tension as she sat silently beside Marcus. Emily walked farther into the suite, near the windows overlooking the city. "You left us with nothing," she said softly into the phone. "I sold my wedding ring to buy food for your children." Jonathan looked away respectfully, but his jaw tightened slightly at those words. Emily listened again before suddenly shaking her head in disbelief. "You heard what?" she asked. "From who?" Her expression changed instantly. Fear mixed with humiliation. Jonathan stepped closer without interrupting. Emily swallowed hard. "No, we are not living in some billionaire's penthouse," she snapped quietly. "The kids needed help." Daniel said something else that made her shoulders tense. Then came the sentence Emily feared most. "Do not threaten me with custody, Daniel." The entire room went silent. Noah stared at his mother with wide eyes, while Lily wrapped both arms protectively around Sophie. Emily's breathing became uneven again as Daniel continued talking. Finally, she ended the call with shaking hands before placing the phone face down on the counter. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Jonathan was the first to break the silence. "Your ex-husband?" Emily nodded weakly. She suddenly looked exhausted all over again, as if the phone call had dragged every painful memory back into the room. "He heard rumors I was staying here," she admitted quietly. "Probably from someone at the diner." Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. "And now?" Emily laughed bitterly under her breath. "Now suddenly he wants to act like a father again." She wrapped her arms around herself tightly. "Daniel always comes back when he thinks there is something to gain." Marcus quietly guided the children toward the living room television, giving the adults privacy without making it obvious. Jonathan waited until the children were distracted before speaking again. Would he actually try for custody? Emily looked down at the marble floor. "I do not know." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I was homeless 6 days ago, Jonathan. Sleeping in a car with 3 kids does not exactly look good in court." Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger toward her, but toward the situation itself. Emily continued before he could respond. "I tried so hard to protect them from all this. I kept telling myself things would get better before anyone noticed how bad it really was." She wiped quickly at tears forming in her eyes. "But now Daniel knows. And if he drags us into court..." She could not finish the sentence. Jonathan remained silent for a moment, studying the fear on her face carefully. Then he walked toward a leather briefcase sitting beside the fireplace and opened it slowly. Emily frowned in confusion. Jonathan removed a thick folder and placed it gently on the kitchen counter between them. "What is that?" she asked quietly. Jonathan's voice stayed calm. "Everything I could find about Daniel Carter in the last 12 hours. Emily stared at him in shock. Jonathan rested one hand against the folder but did not open it yet. "Emily," he said softly, "I do not think your ex-husband wants custody of your children." He looked directly into her eyes now. "I think he wants something else." Emily stared at the folder on the counter as if it might explode the moment she touched it. "Jonathan," she said carefully, "why would you investigate Daniel?" Jonathan remained calm. "Because the moment he threatened your children, he became my concern too." Emily did not know what to feel anymore. Gratitude, fear, embarrassment. Everything inside her had been stretched so thin over the past year that emotions no longer arrived separately. Jonathan slowly opened the folder and turned it toward her. "I have attorneys and investigators who handle sensitive situations for my company," he explained quietly. "When Marcus informed me about the phone call, I asked them to look into your ex-husband." Emily lowered her eyes to the papers spread across the counter. Bank statements, debt records, gambling charges, several overdue notices. Her stomach twisted painfully with every page she recognized. Daniel had hidden more from her than she realized. "Oh my God," she whispered. Jonathan watched her carefully. "You did not know?" Emily shook her head slowly. "I knew he had debt problems before he left, but not like this." Her voice cracked slightly. "He always said things would turn around." Jonathan pointed gently toward another document near the bottom. 3 months ago, he attempted to take out a loan using your name." Emily froze completely. "What?" Jonathan slid the paper closer. "The application was denied because your credit was already damaged." Emily stared at the document until the words blurred together. Suddenly, pieces of the past began falling into place. Bills she never understood. Credit cards appearing maxed out. Collection calls Daniel always told her to ignore. She pressed one trembling hand against her mouth. "He told me losing the apartment was my fault," she whispered. "He said I was not working hard enough." Jonathan's expression hardened slightly, though his voice stayed controlled. "Emily, your husband buried your family financially long before he disappeared." Emily leaned back against the counter like her legs might give out beneath her. All those nights blaming herself. All those hours wondering why she could never catch up no matter how hard she worked. She remembered skipping meals so the kids could eat while Daniel promised he was fixing things. The realization hit her all at once. She had not failed because she was weak. She had been drowning for years without knowing who was holding her underwater. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks now. Jonathan did not interrupt them. He simply stood nearby while she finally allowed herself to break. "I really thought it was me," she whispered through tears. "Every eviction notice, every overdue bill, every time the kids needed something I could not afford." Her breathing shook harder. "I thought I ruined their lives." Jonathan stepped closer carefully, giving her room to move away if she wanted to. But she did not. "Emily," he said softly, "surviving impossible circumstances does not make you a failure." His voice lowered even more. "It makes you exhausted." Emily covered her face with both hands and cried quietly for the first time in months. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of silent crying that comes after carrying too much pain for too long. Across the room, Lily noticed immediately and stood up from the couch. "Mom?" she asked softly. Emily wiped quickly at her tears, trying to pull herself together again, but Jonathan gently shook his head. "You do not have to hide it from them," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him in surprise. Jonathan glanced toward the children with understanding in his eyes. "Your kids already know life has been hard," he said. "What they need now is to see that hard times are ending." Emily stared at him for several seconds without speaking. Nobody had spoken to her with that kind of certainty in a very long time. Then suddenly her phone buzzed again across the counter. "Daniel." Another incoming call. Emily's entire body tensed instantly. Jonathan looked at the screen once before calmly sliding the folder closed. "Answer it," he said quietly. Emily frowned nervously. "Why?" Jonathan's eyes never left the phone. "Because this time," he said calmly, "he is not talking to the same woman he abandoned." Emily stared at the phone vibrating across the counter while every instinct inside her told her not to answer. For months, every conversation with Daniel ended the same way. Blame, excuses, promises that dissolved the moment real responsibility appeared. But this time felt different. Jonathan stood nearby, calm and steady, while the children watched quietly from the living room. Emily slowly picked up the phone and answered. "What?" she said firmly. Daniel's voice came through immediately, sharp with frustration. "You think you can keep my kids from me because some rich guy bought you a hotel room?" Emily closed her eyes briefly, but this time she did not shrink beneath his anger. "You left your children sleeping in a car while you disappeared for months," she replied quietly. "Do not pretend this is suddenly about being a father." Silence hit the line for half a second. Then Daniel changed tactics instantly. Softer voice. Fake concern. Emily recognized it now in a way she never had before. "Emily, I was struggling too," he said. "I made mistakes." Jonathan remained silent across the room, but Emily could feel his presence beside her like solid ground beneath shaking feet. "No," she answered calmly. "You made choices." Daniel's tone hardened again. "You cannot survive without help, and you know it." Emily looked toward her children. Noah was smiling faintly while helping Sophie finish her orange juice. Lily watched her mother carefully, almost like she was waiting to see whether this conversation would hurt her again. And suddenly Emily realized something important. For the first time in years, her children were seeing her stand up instead of apologize. "Listen to me carefully," Emily said into the phone. Her voice no longer trembled. "You do not get to disappear when life becomes difficult and then return when somebody else helps clean up the damage." Daniel started arguing again, but Emily interrupted him before he could continue. "And if you threaten custody one more time, I will make sure the court sees every unpaid debt, every gambling charge, and every loan application you tried to open in my name." Complete silence. Emily almost could not believe the words had come out of her own mouth. Across the room, Jonathan quietly lowered his eyes, hiding the smallest hint of a smile. Daniel spoke again, but now fear had replaced confidence. "Where did you hear all that?" Emily looked directly out the hotel window toward the city below. "It does not matter." Then for the first time since their marriage began falling apart, Emily ended the conversation on her own terms. She hung up the phone and blocked the number before Daniel could call back. The suite stayed quiet afterward. Emily slowly lowered the phone onto the counter, her hands still shaking slightly. But the fear was gone. Jonathan stepped closer carefully. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Emily let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. "Tired," she admitted. Then after a moment, she smiled faintly through tears. "But lighter." Noah suddenly ran across the room, holding a chocolate chip pancake in one hand. "Mom," he asked excitedly, "does this mean we are staying?" Emily knelt down and wrapped both arms around him while Sophie climbed into her lap beside him. Lily joined them seconds later, and suddenly all three children were holding onto her at once. Emily closed her eyes tightly, overwhelmed by the feeling of finally being able to breathe again. Jonathan watched quietly from nearby, giving the moment space instead of stepping into it. That mattered to Emily more than he probably realized. 2 weeks later, Emily and the children moved into a small furnished home owned by one of Jonathan's housing foundations. It was not a mansion. It was not luxury, but it was safe. The children each had their own bed for the first time in months. Emily found stable work managing community outreach programs through Jonathan's nonprofit organization, helping single mothers rebuild after homelessness. And some evenings, after long days finally filled with hope instead of fear, Jonathan would stop by the little house, carrying takeout containers while Noah raced to open the front door before anyone else could reach it. One night, as snow quietly fell outside the windows, Lily looked up from the living room couch and asked the question everyone had secretly been wondering. "Mom," she said softly, "does this mean Mr. Jonathan is part of our family now?" Emily looked toward Jonathan standing in the kitchen helping Sophie decorate cookies while laughter filled the tiny house. Then she smiled quietly to herself, because for the first time in a very long time, tomorrow no longer felt frightening.